Hello everybody, I'm George from Ireland. In this video I'm going to suggest my policies for Joe Biden now that he's president-elect, and it's only about 10 weeks till he will be sworn in by the Chief Justices of the United States Supreme Court. And I was holding my breath in the run-up to the election. Obviously, there was a serious chance that Trump was going to win re-election. And I feared that Biden might stumble, literally, not just figuratively. He might get coronavirus. He might even drop dead. I mean, he's 77. He's in quite good health for a man his age. He was jogging onto the stage a few days ago, and Trump couldn't do that. I'd like to see Trump try. Not that I'm particularly physically fit, but Trump can't go more than 100 yards without going in a golf cart. But back to Biden. Woo! So all my policy suggestions, and some of the ones that he's talked about himself, but a lot of these he won't get through. But these are just nice ideas. If he achieved even half of this, I would be elated. I know some people will say that I shouldn't poke my snout into American affairs. Well, it does concern me. All right, I'm a citizen of the world. We all share this planet. Problems recognize no borders. Climate change doesn't stop at an international frontier, nor does crimes or drugs. I mean, the United States has got hundreds of military bases beyond its borders. You might argue that's a good thing, but the United States most certainly does not confine itself to its own sovereign territory and is involved in the internal affairs of other countries, which you might say is laudable. But yes, I most certainly have the right to opine on the politics of the United States. And if you're American or any other nationality, please feel welcome to talk about the politics of the Republic of Ireland or indeed the UK. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. I could completely disagree. I might see eye to eye with you, but I would never question your right to voice an opinion about the domestic affairs of my part of the world. So coming on to Biden, and this is in no particular sequence. How about statehood for Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico, some people don't realize, is a territory of the United States. It is not a state of the United States. So it's an island of the Caribbean Sea, wrested from Spain in the Spanish-American War, 1799. Pursuant to the Jones Act of 1912, all Puerto Ricans are American citizens. So most of them are Hispanic. They can all speak English, mostly fluently. And because they're US citizens, they have the right to go to the actual United States. US citizens from the mainland, or indeed Hawaii, Alaska, they can move to Puerto Rico anytime they want. Don't need to fill out a single form, have the right to live and work there as long as they wish. Puerto Rico, yes, it has people in the House of Representatives, but they cannot vote. They can only speak. So I suggest this anomaly be corrected, and they rely on the United States for defense and foreign affairs. But actually, give them a vote, fully integrate them, because 10 years ago they voted in a referendum that they wanted that. Now the Republicans want to block this because Puerto Rico is heavily Democrat, and so that would be 2 more senators for the Democrats, and they'd have about 4 people in the House of Representatives, about 6 more electoral votes. So it's probably not going to happen. You need both houses of Congress to agree to this, but that's why no state's been admitted to the Union since Hawaii and Alaska in 1959. Another thing is, because states try and make it difficult to register to vote, how about the federal government assumes responsibility and automatically registers all American citizens to vote when they have their 18th birthday? Some states want this sort of voter ID card. Okay, so the US government could maybe have a voluntary thing, or maybe even a compulsory thing, where they will have an ID card which they'll mail to you, and they'll never require you show it. But if your state wants voter ID, you've already got that, because some people don't have driving licenses. I know it's difficult to get around without driving license in the United States because there's so little public transport, which is another problem. So that particularly impacts low-income people who've had their driving license taken away, then they're unemployable, more likely to turn to crime, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, and gun control. But because of the Second Amendment, this is virtually impossible to get through 2/3 of both houses of Congress to pass something. Again, that has not happened since 1969. But how could it be reframed saying a sane, law-abiding adult shall be allowed 1 non-military grade weapon for hunting and 1 for defense, or something like that? Some sort of sensible form of words. What's non-military? I don't want to get into the particulars of it. I don't know much about firearms. Something along those lines. or you could just have a ruinous tax on bullets or something like that, so that there wouldn't be so many people shooting each other. Trade with Cuba, normalize relations with Cuba. Obama did it, greatly to his credit. I wanted that to happen. I didn't believe that he would do. I mean, yes, Cuba's not a fully free country. There are many unfree countries in the world. The United States has diplomatic relations and trades with far worse regimes than Cuba. I've been there, and there are lots of good things about it for the ordinary people. They can do what they want in many ways. They can be religious or not. They can leave the country, which they weren't allowed to 10 years ago, anytime. And the basics of life are guaranteed. But yeah, they can't have a real opposition party. And there's certain things they can't say out, they get jailed, which is, of course, terrible. I would like them to have full liberty. But it's not the savagely oppressive regime that Republicans would have people believe. And they could ideally work out some sort of deal where the Cubans could pay a scythement for property that was sequestrated from US companies in the 1960s. Maybe it could be some sort of tax on Cuban goods eventually be paid off, and trade would enrich both sides. And this is always the argument that Republicans employ about China, wherever. Oh, but democracy will follow trade, which obviously is not true. There's this canard that capitalism necessarily leads to democracy, or that socialism leads to dictatorship. Well, which isn't true. Sometimes there's a socialist dictatorship, sometimes there's a capitalist dictatorship. And you could have a democratic socialist state, you could have a capitalist socialist state, and obviously most states are a blend of socialism and capitalism. So the Iran deal, just reviving the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action would be fabulous. I think that Iranians would leap at the chance. Their economy is severely suffering, and they don't want to escalate things to face a war against the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, and possibly others. Got fairly bad relations with Azerbaijan, not great relations with Turkey. Iraq and Syria wouldn't come to their side. They got a lot of troops in Syria that had to get back. Other countries would be against them, like Bahrain, possibly the UAE. We'd see. But I mean, you could even have an addendum saying, and you have to withdraw your troops from Syria, which would put greater pressure on the Assad regime to fight on, because the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are the ones who really torn the guts out of ISIS. And I know it doesn't suit most people in the United States to acknowledge that the battle against ISIS has been largely won by Iranian ground troops and the Russian Air Force. And then there will be a heavier burden for Russia to carry. It will be more difficult for Assad. Obviously, the flip side of that is then that would actually strengthen ISIS. So the thing is, the United States opposes both sides there. Maybe even require the Iranians to withdraw from Iraq. Again, they might well accept that, thinking that war has largely been won, or Russia will successfully bail out Assad, things like that. And just their economy would go up, and it would lead to a détente in the whole region. I know some ultra-Zionists of the Saudi Arabians wouldn't like it, but tough. I mean, I don't think they're not going to abandon the United States. The Israelis, they don't desperately need, but they appreciate the money, the intelligence, the cooperation, the diplomatic cover, the wielding of the United Nations Security Council veto, and on and on. I think Biden's not going to shift the embassy away from Jerusalem. I would like him to make some recognition of Palestinian rights. It's the capital of Palestine too, Al-Quds Al-Arabi, or Jerusalem as it's usually known. Other things. So coming back, signing up to the Paris deal, this I do think he will do. That every single country in the world agreed that the Paris deal was a minimum. The only other country that didn't sign, I can't remember, it's a Central American one, said because it didn't go far enough. I mean, the scientific consensus has been crystal clear for decades. It's really just not debatable. It's like saying that gravity is not true, or evolution didn't happen, or something like that. Yes, climate change indubitably is happening, and yes, it is partly anthropogenic at least, and yes, it does have a deleterious effect on our health and on the planet. Now, there's some wiggle room for just how bad it is, and to what degree humankind has occasioned it, and so on. And there's another matter of what we do about it and who should bear the burden. But a lot of Republicans wouldn't even accept the premise, and will vehemently deny easily observable facts which are irrefragably proven. So nothing has ended the trade war with China. Remember Trump saying that trade wars are good and easy to end. Ha ha ha. Can anybody cite an example of a trade war that was won? I mean, particularly by the United States? Maybe there's one or two, I don't know, but I haven't heard any. So how's that one going? He didn't boast about that one, the election. I wonder why. Or he was this much of a lame brain to think that the tariffs would be paid by China. No, they're paid by American consumers. And they don't necessarily buy the American alternative product. They might buy the Canadian one or the Swiss one or the whatever, or just go without. So, and also the American companies which are importing things and selling these things, they're also suffering. So, and that would be good for both sides. Bolstering support for Ukraine and no longer dangling it and trying to make it contingent upon inventing bogus accusations against a rival's candidate's son. You could stop Nord Stream 2, that's the pipeline under the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany carrying gas. Now, I'm not against people buying liquid natural gas, including from Russia, but because of all sorts of malign behavior, poisoning people with Novichok, admittedly Alexei Navalny, who was at least a Russian citizen, poisoned in Russia, that would be a way of hitting back. Electoral interference, I don't think there was much electoral interference from Russia this time. Why? Did they figure it didn't work, or maybe the pushback was too much? Perhaps the deterrent effect was successful this time. That Trump really hadn't delivered, he hadn't paid dividends. Yes, he'd caused a lot of ructions in the United States, set Americans at their throats, enfeebled NATO. He'd kept Western European leaders up at night, worrying Trump, but he didn't significantly improve the relationship with Russia. Okay, he didn't make it worse. He didn't take a firm stand to support freedom in Ukraine from Russia's unprovoked aggression. But he talked a big game, but ultimately gave in to people who said, no, we have to stand by our allies. So he did something for the Ukraine at least. So more military aid, more weapons, whatever, maybe troops in the western part of the Ukraine, not actually fighting, really freeing the Ukrainian army to go there. I thought picking up the bill, a bounty for all Ukrainian soldiers so that Russia will know this actually conflict's not going to end. We've been fighting for 5.5 years and there's no end in sight, and it's expensive, and several thousands of our soldiers have got killed. We've got less freedom of action elsewhere, and nobody's recognised Crimea as ours. Nobody's reckoned Donbass or Luhansk as ours. So it didn't work out. Crime must not pay, because they've already illegally occupying Moldova. They're already illegally occupying Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which both belong to to Georgia. So they'll just do it to more and more countries. So they'll, I thought, eventually reassess and decide it's just a price not worth paying. By the way, Putin may well have Parkinson's, which I thought that weird walk, and may well be retiring in January, in which case Sergei Shoigu is probably going to be president. So green energy, a Green New Deal, that would be fabulous, it would be quite expensive, but, there are so many severe problems that Biden's got to deal with. He's inheriting damnosa hereditas. Look at the economy, which is tanked. Look at soaring unemployment. Look at 250,000 coronavirus deaths and no end in sight. Trump set an appalling example, and not enough social distancing, not enough mask wearing, and people aren't going to suddenly change their behavior now. They got bored of it, of coronavirus. So what do you do? Thankfully this vaccine might have come along now. Had it come a month ago, Trump might have won the re-election. And I'm surprised he didn't lie and say, oh yeah, we've got a vaccine, even when he didn't. So ending the Electoral College, again, that will require an amendment to the Constitution, and I shan't bake my breath. That's not going to happen. It would be fabulous if it was by the popular vote, because the Democrats have won 7 out of the last 8 elections by popular vote in presidential elections, 4 in a row, put it another way. So it was surprising the Democrats won by so little. They won the midterms by 8 percentage points. They won the presidential election by 4 percentage points. They usually do better in presidential years because of higher turnout. So it's troubling that the Republicans did so well, lost by only 4 percentage points. That Trump did better in share of the vote and better in number of the votes than last time. I know the number of votes goes up always because the population's going up. Yeah, it would do. So, of course, investigate Trump. No, he mustn't be let off the hook. Oh, we must heal the country. Well, sorry, he's got to bear the consequences of his rampageous criminality in office, breaching the emoluments clause, sending troops to stay in his hotels, having Mike Pence stay on the far side of Ireland from Dublin when there's meant to be meetings in Dublin, just so the taxpayer was paying into Trump's hotels, for example. So if Trump is convicted of various crimes and goes to prison for the rest of his life in Supermax, I would be elated. Again, I don't think it'll happen. It's a grossly unjust country, and very wealthy people virtually always get away with it, and that is something in his low cunning, obviously observed very early in life. He could act with virtual impunity. His whole Fifth Avenue principle, he could shoot somebody dead on broad daylight in Fifth Avenue and get off scot-free. And that's more or less what he's been trying to do, to test the bounds of impunity. So, I mean, it'd be great if there were more pardons for people in federal prisons. Depends who they are. Minor drug offenders, something like that. Maybe even more serious offenders if they served a very long time, if they've generally reformed, because it costs loads of money, they're vulnerable to coronavirus, and sometimes it's just justice. Unduly long sentences are unfair. That's it. Even if it does protect the public. I mean, obviously there's a trade-off. How much does it protect them, and how much wrong have they done? And obviously people in prison officers, they're in danger too. We've got to think about their rights too. So there's still a danger in prison. They're just less of a danger to fewer people. I know I'd rather danger to fewer people than rather more. Or for theft, especially if it was minor, if it was only a few times. I believe in being Ruth and forgiving people. Not all the time, not totally, depends on the situation. Giving people several chances. 3 million people in prison. I know not all of those are in federal prison, of course, but the highest per capita prison population in the world, out of 193 countries. There's got to be something very wrong when the land of the free is addicted to locking people up. Anyway, cutting military spending, and I know, yes, that's the power of the purse of the Congress, not the president, but, the United States does not need to be able to blow up the world 100 times over, even if Russia can. Blowing the world up just once is more than adequate. Okay, I would have a bit more than that in case I somehow get your nukes. A new START treaty to reduce the costs of both sides would be fantastic. That would get the debt down, and that would mean money could be spent on more useful things. Bringing back the Affordable Care and Patient Protection Act, dubbed Obamacare by those who wish to say it was such a dreadful thing. I don't think it was wicked at all. And by the way, you don't have to use that insurance. You can just pay a fine. You don't have to buy insurance. Publicly funded healthcare would be even better. And again, you wouldn't be obliged to use it. You can go private if you want to, just like Canada. Canada's not a communist country. It's a staggering zombie lie. People pretending, oh, it's dreadful. The government taking over healthcare. Well, they're offering healthcare. Again, you're not obliged to use it. There are private clinics you can go to. I mean, the government's taken over schools. Is that the end of the world? Like they've taken over roads, or taken over national parks, or taken over the courts, or taken over prisons, or taken over the Army and the Air Force and the Navy and the Marine Corps and the National Guard. But somehow you don't think that's the end of the world. And these are services, most of them, you don't get a choice about using. You have to. There is no alternative. I don't want to use the Army, but it can be used on your behalf, whether as an individual you approve of that or not. One thing is, I think Biden just served one term. He's already glitching as it is. Just to bow out graciously and have Kamala Harris, the vice president, seek election next time. Incumbents win 75% of the time. Her gender may well redound to her advantage. That didn't really particularly work for Hillary, but some women would like to see a woman elected. I don't think Kamala Harris is a hate figure. I know she's not fabulously popular, but she might become so. Her ethnicity might actuate more ethnic minority people to vote, work for Obama to some extent. I know it would also awaken the white supremacists to vote against her. And obviously high time that a woman and an ethnic minority person are seated to the top office. Her picking another woman or another non-white person as her running mate, that might be too left field. Wouldn't bother me one whit. But a lot of people in the United States would vote against it, would say, oh my God, that's just unacceptable, even though 2 white males wasn't seen to be excessive for centuries. I thought a white male, Pete Buttigieg, as he's gay, that's still a bit novel. And then he would have to have, say, ideally a Hispanic woman as his vice president if he became president. But anyway, obviously Democrats can't be complacent. And this was an election not just for Democrats, but for democracy itself, the way Trump and his Republicans are trying to degrade it so much. Now, apology for slavery, not something I'm in favour of. It wouldn't be a terrible thing. From Democrats' point of view, it would be an astute move. Just consider the psephology, the way about 90% of African Americans vote for the Democrats, which is not as high as it used to be. George W. Bush got only 5% of the African American vote, despite making huge efforts to achieve an inroads in that community. So having some sort of committee of scholars look into this and decide the precise form of words and where and when it's going to be, not on day one, going to a relevant location, maybe that jetty where the first captives from Africa were brought ashore in chains and treated with the most diabolical cruelty. Maybe that would be the fit setting, saying that on the behalf of the United States, I apologize to African Americans, all those of African stock who were abducted in their homelands and taken across the ocean and treated savagely, forced to toil under the broiling sun and the leather lash for centuries. We apologize for the hurt, the cruelty, the inhumanity, and the repercussions which are felt to this very day. Something like that. And then the thing is, that would then lead to calls for, well, the corollary. If you accept responsibility, it must automatically follow that you have to pay compensation. So who gets how much, and on and on. And that opens many issues, a whole can of worms, many would say. But even if you don't pay compensation, that would be appreciated by some as at least a step in the right direction, at least a modicum of justice and recognition of the unspeakable suffering that was visited upon generations of people of African stock. Anyway, more judges in the Supreme Court, Republican-appointed judges are the majority. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say how many judges there are. It's hovered around 9. It has been 12. And when I think it was Roosevelt, FDR, proposed appointing more, again, Republicans threw the toys out of the pram, said this is an outrageous degradation of our Constitution, how unutterably invidious. You try to pack the court with your placemen. No, we shan't stand for this. This is politicized justice. Well, you can say that, but it's not unconstitutional because the Constitution doesn't prohibit it. And it just depends whether you can get the Senate to confirm them. Again, it doesn't look like the Democrats are going to get the Senate. If they fall short, it won't be by much, 1 or 2. Would be some Republicans that come across. People are not going to be always partisan. And with Trump gone, maybe some sort of atmosphere of placidity and decency and bipartisanship might return. But, Biden's going to have his work cut out. And I would advise him just to be rather reticent. People would appreciate a bit of tranquility, because there's been all this sound and fury from Trump, these midnight Twitter storms, these tantrums, and I think people would really savor some normalcy, and him not tweeting all the time, just make one announcement a week. I reckon think his ratings will be quite high. He's a grandfatherly figure. He's got the affability of Ronald Reagan, not the policies. So people have a soft spot for him, will be quite indulgent, and that they understand that he's slightly losing his marbles. Not as badly as Trump did, who's obviously got pre-Alzheimer's, and his senility is more advanced. Trump was never a morally decent person or an intelligent person in the first place. Biden was sort of like intellectually second rate, which is okay. You don't need to be a genius to be president, whereas Trump is was a real dimwit. Nothing to be ashamed of. People who are academically subnormal can be very morally good people, can have other talents, but that's not true of Trump. Well, that's enough from me, so I'm about to sign off, so please subscribe. I'm George from Ireland. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and so on. Watch my British poesy channel, as well as my English law channel. Toodle pip.